Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about XRP, and we're going to be looking at the risk metric. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Now, you guys know me. I don't frequently make videos about individual altcoins, right? And if I do, it's about, if I talk about one, it might be every 6 months or so. And again, one of the reasons for that is because I value my portfolio in Satoshis, right? So what I care about is the Satoshi valuation of my portfolio more so than the USD valuation. And over a long enough period of time, most altcoins just bleed back to Bitcoin, if not all of them, given enough cycles, right? So with that in mind, I tend to sort of focus more on Bitcoin, and I'll talk about Ethereum some, and then occasionally I'll talk some about these altcoins. And I've had a lot of people in the comment section, I've noticed, ask about some of the altcoins, so at least I thought I would provide some thought process on it. For me this cycle, I didn't really even, XRP didn't really even grab my attention until its double bottom against Bitcoin. This is when I really first started being a little bit more optimistic about it this cycle. It was back on this double bottom. We even did a couple of videos about it. Also talked a lot about it on ITC Premium. But we talked about this double bottom, and that's what you want to look for. You don't always get double bottoms with altcoins, so I don't want to imply that always has to play out. But whenever you do have double bottom setups on an altcoin with its Bitcoin pair, it's usually a pretty good sign. Also, if you can couple it with kind of a similar time frame, right? Like if you look at this was June of 2024, and then like November. If you look at the cycle before, right, you can also see a low here in June and then another low in November. Now that was not a double bottom, but it did lead to a nice spike. This one was a double bottom and the spike was a lot higher. What's interesting is it just went back up basically to the same level it went to, 4 years previous. Now, right now, XRP Bitcoin is nearly at the same valuation, if not the exact same valuation that it was at in August of 2021, right? So in August 2021, XRP was at this same Satoshi valuation, believe it or not, right? I mean, it was. And, obviously I've talked a ton about Bitcoin dominance this cycle. And, to be completely honest, a lot of the loudest critics that I had for the Bitcoin dominance views that I had, like I was constantly promoting Bitcoin dominance, and I did say that dominance would likely find some resistance here at that 66% level up here, and then drop, and then probably rebound in late August. But a lot of the people that really wouldn't accept that and were always calling for a big dump were also really bullish on a lot of these altcoins, and including XRP. What I'm trying to say is that you don't have to just be blindly bullish on all these altcoins nonstop. One of the nice things, you look for these double bottom setups, right? So this has already played out this cycle, but in the future cycles, if you're watching an altcoin bleed back to Bitcoin, and then you're like wondering, well, when is it going to turn around? One of the things you could look for is this double bottom pattern that some of these altcoins get against Bitcoin. That shows you a good sign for a nice rally. So XRP, technically speaking, is still well down against Bitcoin since 2017. Most things are, right? Even Ethereum is down against Bitcoin since 2017. In fact, it's a very similar pattern, if you're being honest. But the point that I'm trying to make is a lot of people have sort of reached out and they've said, like, well, where's XRP going to go? And why does it keep stalling out, around these levels? Well, the reason why I think it hasn't really been able to sort of push higher is because the risk, right? The risk of XRP, not like the fundamental risk. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about based on what it has historically done. Based on what it's historically done, the risk on it has remained relatively high. Now, this is basically blue is 0 and red is 1, and you want it to be you want to be buying assets when they're at low risk levels and then selling when they're at high risk levels. if you take the color code out of this and you just look at it like this, you can see that XRP has sort of spiked into the 0.8 to 0.9 wristband a few times now. And every single time it does, it ends up just getting sold off. Now, technically, though, I mean, you got some higher lows here, but I would say, I would say that, you know, I would say two things. If over the next few months, if XRP does go to the 0.9 to 1 wristband, I think it makes sense to run for the hills, right? Like, again, just look at all these major tops by XRP, right? Anytime it hits that highest wristband, that's it, right? You don't want to sort of sit around and wait, because usually after that happens, it's not good, especially considering we have likely a 2026 bear market coming up. If you look at 2014, you can see that XRP dropped quite a bit, right? So think about it like this. Look in 2014, and I think I might need to actually find a different exchange here to use to actually look back a little bit further. I'm not sure which one. I think it was... I'm not sure which one on here still has it going all the way back. Probably this one does. Not really sure what that wick is. But if you look at 2014 for, I guess this is the this is basically when it first came out. I mean, there wasn't really any movement on it, right? It was just that. But in 2018, XRP dropped about 80%, and then in 2022 it dropped about 60%. So it probably makes sense to assume that it will drop in the year of 2026. And so I would say one of two things, right? One of two things. One thing is if XRP does go to the 0.9 to 1 wristband sometime in the next 5 months, especially if it goes all the way up to 1 risk, that's probably it, right? You know, pack it up and we'll see you next cycle. If it doesn't, right? If it doesn't get up there, there's still a chance that it could, but by the end of the year, and really, you could argue, very beginning of January at the absolute latest, if it still hasn't gone to that higher wristband, then there's a good chance it probably isn't going to, right? And it'll just top out at a lower wristband, right? Because there is a reality of, like, it doesn't tend to spend that much time at the higher risk levels. And so, there's a chance that it's just spending a lot more time at these higher risk levels rather than just getting a spike very briefly up to an even higher risk level. Like, if you look at the time in the wristbands, for something like XRP, you'll notice that it's only spent 35 days in its entire history in that higher wristband. So if it happens, it's not going to last for very long. And if it doesn't happen, it's just because it's spending so much more of its time in this wristband right here, which normally it doesn't either, right? Like normally it'll just kind of spike up and then be done with. It's been staying a little bit more elevated this time. Also, if you look at XRP on its Bitcoin pair, this is actually a very similar pattern that we had last cycle at this exact same time, right? Like, let me switch this back to a log scale. Basically what you had was this, this big run up and then a big dump, kind of the same level, and then another spike, but then it sold off again, right? It sold off again. And this would actually line up with the idea that Bitcoin dominance is going to likely bounce here in September. And September is a month where dominance normally changes direction from whatever direction it's going. So I would argue that you're likely going to see a pullback by the XRP Bitcoin valuation in the months of September and October. That's what I would guess. You can also see, by the way, in 2021, that around the same time, XRP was heading to its 20-week SMA, right? It ended up bouncing in September around its 20-week SMA. The 20-week SMA for XRP right now corresponds to about $2.57, $2.67, right? So let's just call it around 260 to 270. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see XRP check in with that bull market support band in September, probably even wicks below it like it did in September of 2021. So just be aware that that's likely going to come. And if that does happen, and if it bounces, again, there's no guarantee that it goes to a new high, but the one thing that XRP has going for it this cycle compared to last cycle is that last cycle, it was actually putting in lower highs, in that time period. And this cycle, it's actually been putting in, at least we've got two higher highs, right? So if XRP comes down here to the bull market support band in September and then finds support and then bounces, if it does go to a higher high, and then you see that risk metric for XRP, in the 0.9 to 1 risk band, that could be it. Now, I know you got a lot of people out there putting out crazy price predictions and whatnot, but that always happens, near the end of longer cycles, right? Like the bull market, right? When you're near the end of these multi-year bull markets, like we have been, you'll see all sorts of crazy predictions. So just be aware that, if there's a pullback in September and then there's another run in Q4, don't fall for all the crazy price predictions, right? Try to be a little bit more level-headed with that kind of stuff, because that's the issue with any altcoin, is people throw out all sorts of crazy price predictions and then they just disappear the minute that it doesn't actually pan out. So my guess is that you're going to see XRP fall into the bull market support band in the months of September, probably see it bounce in October, and then whatever it bounces to over that time frame will likely be the market cycle top for it this market cycle. And I think it makes sense to keep an eye on the risk metric, and if it hits that higher risk metric, higher risk band, that's probably it. And if it keeps not hitting it, then there's still a chance it could hit it for at least a few more months. But if you think about the cycle and sort of Bitcoin controlling, the cycle in general, if you look at like the ROI from the low for something like Bitcoin, I mean, you can see it's probably getting, we're getting the final innings of the market cycle, right? We're in the final innings of it. And you're starting to see some other coins pop off here a little bit. Like Ethereum is up a lot in a relatively short period of time. If that stuff starts to make its way to the altcoin market, let's say in October or something, that could be a sign that we're getting pretty close to the end. So keep an eye on that stuff. I know a lot of XRP investors aren't necessarily the biggest fans of Bitcoin, but hey, no one's perfect, right? If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.